This week on London Real, we have Matt Elek, Managing Director for Vice Media.
We're in Baghdad. We're here to interview the only Iraqi heavy metal band.
The people making this stuff really give a shit. You gotta really fucking care about what you're making. No matter what it is, stick to your craft, do it well, care about it, be passionate about it. This is our view on the world. It's not, we're not pretending that it is every single fact that's ever been delivered on a single subject.
This is risky, it's dangerous. People would say it's really fucking stupid.
You could hate us, or you could love us. We just wanted you to have an opinion about us. Young people are first and foremost digesting all their information and content in a digital space. We don't have a slant at all. The best way to win is by having a better story and being more interesting and being more exciting. Everyone gets the economics of it. I want to watch this show and somebody had to pay for it, and it's not me because I'm watching it for free online.
London Real presents Matt Elek, Vice.
Smart people working very hard and being very dedicated to it.
Welcome back to London Real. It's a bit of a shout out to my girls Iggy and Charlie XCX. Big fans of what they're doing, and those girls are definitely representing. Have you heard of Vice? That's my question for you, and that doesn't mean your own personal vice, but I'm referring to more about Vice Media, and maybe you've watched Vice News, or maybe you've read something on a blog called Motherboard, or maybe you've read something called Munchies or Noisey. The list continues, and all of these are brought to you by a company called Vice Media that was started in 1994 as a punk magazine for in Montreal, basically. And as their CEO Shane Smith used to say, they used to talk about sneakers and drugs, and now they're in Ukraine, in Kiev, covering the crisis on the front lines. And if you've ever watched any of Shane Smith's stuff, specifically his documentary about Liberia with General Buck Naked, which is off the fucking charts, or even their latest stuff with Dennis Rodman going to North Korea and hanging out with Kim Jong-un, they're on HBO. This place is going, this company is going places, and it's pretty much a given now. It's funny, when I was sitting down with Matt Elek, who's a managing director of the Europe, Middle East and Africa markets here in London, he couldn't talk about some of the news happening because people want to buy Vice, and we're talking billions of dollars. And these are big companies like Time Warner. Rupert Murdoch already owns a small piece of them with his Fox Media, and Vice is now big business, and something that came up as kind of an alternative news source is now something that the mainstream media really wants to get a piece of. And it's quite fascinating to see how it has all played out. And it's really peculiar to me when I think about the future of media being Vice-ish, because some of the cachet of Vice is that it's not like your mom and dad's news. So it's interesting for me to see how far we can push this envelope. And Matt answered lots of questions as far as the genesis of their style, why they like to kind of give it the tell it as it is style. They shun voiceovers in a lot of their video. And I think one of their founders said it best, in that no media is truly objective, including ourselves here at London Real. So instead of trying to feign objectivity, admit that you're being subjective and then try to call it like that is. And I think that's the essence of Vice, if I had to boil it down to something. So I hope you enjoy this. We had a good long talk about all the different aspects of Vice, and I'm super impressed with what they have produced, and they're just not slowing down. They have a huge team. They're constantly forward thinking, and whether or not they're bought out or not, this brand is going to be with us for a long time. And it's something we should get used to, and then start to really question a lot of what we've been watching for a long time, which is, the television news anchors at my good friends, the BBC and Fox News, and all these traditional media sources, which sometimes we're listening to, and both of us, or all of you, are thinking, you know, I don't really know if this guy even knows what he's talking about. So there you go. That's Matt Elek from Vice, and hope you enjoy that part of the show. Just wanted to give a shout out to the guys that gave me my coffee that I ate this morning and drank this morning. I guess it's a bit of both because that's bulletproof. If you don't know it, it's a coffee that's made without molds and toxins, and so you're starting off getting a coffee that's going to go well into your system, especially if you're sensitive to those kind of things. And then I add to that some grass-fed butter and their brain octane oil, which is kind of like the best of a coconut oil. It's got the medium chain triglycerides and all the good stuff, and I blend it up. For the guests I serve it to on London Real is a 100% success rate, which is a statistical anomaly, which doesn't make any sense to me how everyone could love this coffee, but they do. So I highly recommend it. Big fans of those guys. They have a great podcast and lots of exciting things happening with them. So big shout out to them for hooking you up with this show for free, and I want to thank them. Also, I want to encourage you, if you like this show or like our vibe, to check out more episodes of London Real. They're free, of course, and I find the best way to get them is to check out our website, which is brought to you by the guys at Squarespace. If you go to the episodes section, you can actually go and search by category right now. So you can check out episodes on politics, or episodes on fitness, or episodes on success, making yourself a better person, businessman, father, boyfriend, whatever you want to be. And now our site is just looking just awesome, and we've got some great articles on there on our blog. We've got one of our writers, David Gilmore, who's writing some fantastic pieces, very current events, a lot of very cool things going on there. So check that out, and let me know what you think. Send me a message at brian@londonreal.tv. I got a bunch of gaps coming up in August and September, and I'm looking for the best guests. So if you got some suggestions, or you just want to contact someone for London Real, go ahead and do it, and then put me as a CC, and we'll see if we can make it happen. And there you go. We're enjoying one of the only hot days that we will have here in London. I think there'll be a total of maybe 10. So I'm trying to enjoy this, and when it gets so hot in my studio, I know that's what we call a high quality problem. So there you go. Now I'm going to leave you with the managing director of Vice Media, Mr. Matt Elek. Enjoy. Okay, let's do this.
Let's go.
Okay, this is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Mr. Matt Elek, who is a managing director at Vice Media here in London. You are in charge of publishing, digital, events, television, and communications for the Europe, Middle East, and Africa. You've been at Vice almost 12 years since graduating from the London School of Economics. Vice started as a punk magazine in Montreal in the mid-90s, and now you guys attract, I think, nearly 1 billion YouTube views a year across your brands like Vice News, Motherboard, Noisey, Thump, Munchies, Fightland. I'm sure I'm missing more. You guys are on HBO. You guys are, getting parts of you bought by Rupert Murdoch's Fox. It's pretty crazy. Matt, welcome to London Real.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. A good friend of ours who kind of does a lot of our YouTube stuff, and now he works for a multi-channel network. He was down in Cannes a few months ago, and I think it was one of the MIP conferences where a bunch of the television people were there. And he said, Shane Smith went on stage and was talking about what you guys did, and then YouTube kind of said, this is the latest in news, and he wasn't expecting Vice News to come up, and apparently you guys rolled some footage and just blew this whole audience of people away. These were like industry people, buyers, and all this stuff. And I think everyone was just like, wow, this is the next level of news. So he was just saying amazing things. And I was just wondering if you could talk me through your last 12 years of Vice, what it was like when you started, and what you guys are up to now, including the news.
Sure. So I guess I started in 2002, the UK office with two other guys, a guy called Andrew Crichton and Andy Capper. And, previous to that, of course, Vice had been going for 8 years, I think. And it started in Montreal as a sort of punk rock fanzine, sort of partly funded by a government get back to work scheme kind of thing. Okay. And so it was three friends, and they had then, to make a long story short, they'd gone to New York and had a little bit of investment and started growing up and expanding. And then so we launched the first foreign edition of Vice. And so that was it. It was a really earnest kind of independent publishing effort for us. And we were reasonably good at it, and we built an audience pretty quickly, and then we expanded into other markets in Europe. And we started in Sweden. After about a year doing the UK, we did Sweden, then we did Italy, I think was our second, and Germany. And, for the first couple of years, and certainly the first 10 years of Vice, we built an independent publishing business, which, I guess in the independent publishing world, we were sort of big fish in a very, very small pond. The world of independent publishing is not, particularly these days, not a place to make tons of money. But at the time, we were doing well, and we all enjoyed it. But I think, we always had more ambition, right? We didn't just want to have a cool zine, because lots of those indie publishing efforts, that's what they are. They're cool zines. A lot of it, often is driven by the founder who, wants to go to the right parties and make a bit of money and, be a thing. And we were always, I guess, a little bit more ambitious and international about that stuff. So we were doing the magazine, and then we had a website. And then Shane and Spike Jones, who've been friends for a long time, were talking about video, and Spike, I guess, was making films and had been doing so for a while. And so he sort of convinced Shane that, of course, you should be shooting all this stuff. You write good articles. Making the leap into filming them isn't such a big leap. And so Eddie Moretti, who's the chief creative officer at Vice, and Sarush, one of the co-founders, went off and they made our first big piece of video, which was a documentary called Heavy Metal in Baghdad, which was...
I've seen that, yeah. That was what, 08 or 09? Or is it that far back?
I think it was earlier than that. It was 2005, maybe.
Wow, okay.
Something like
so
that.
Spike and Shane had already spoke, because Shane has that famous quote where Spike was like, "You're getting all this on video, right?" And Shane was like, yeah. And then he was like, "Okay, we got to start taping everything."
Yeah, and so that article, Heavy Metal in Baghdad, was a magazine article. And it was, I remember the feature. It was like a 2-page story about this band in Iraq. And
you had sent people out to Baghdad to cover it?
I think I can't remember the details, and I wasn't involved in finding the story. But I think someone had found this story, and I can't remember how. And so it was just an article. It was like a really good article about kids in Iraq. And this was in the context of, we're like 2 years into the Iraq war at this stage.
Early days, yeah.
So it was, a really interesting way of sort of contextualizing what does it mean to be a young person living in Baghdad right now. Because if you watch the news, you basically just see, death and destruction and maiming and good guys and bad guys. And it's, presented in this kind of Star Wars, the good and the bad. And so a lot of that stuff we were doing at the time, or at least certainly that article anyways, was about contextualizing, being young, or contextualizing just like real normal people and what happens in their lives and within the context of these things. And so they went out and they shot this, what was meant to be just a short piece of video. I think it was meant to be, 20 minutes or half an hour. And around that time, we were launching what was then called VBS, Vice Broadcasting Systems, which was like an early version of an IPTV network. And so that became that was the launch piece of content. And people liked it a lot. I mean, I think it turned out even today, like maybe one of the better things we've ever made, or in my opinion it is anyway.
And this is all before YouTube, just to give people context. I mean, there wasn't really online video in 05, 06, right? YouTube was like 07, 08 when it kind of...
I can't remember. Yeah, there wasn't a lot out there. I mean, there were certainly things, but it wasn't yet, the engine of the internet that it is now.
So when you released Heavy Metal in Baghdad, that was as a film, kind of independent cinema, or did it make it to television?
So we first did it, I think we released the first bit online, and then everyone liked it, so they went back and they shot another segment. I think they went back about a year later. And at this stage, Eddie and Suresh, I think, had developed a relationship with the guys in the band, and it wasn't just, pure, we go, we shoot, and we get back on a plane. There was a relationship, and I think they felt, attached to these guys and their story. And so in some ways it came back, and it turned out Spike did, I think, a bunch of the editing, or certainly, worked on it. And it became a big thing. It got theatrical release around the world. And in this country, it ran on the BBC, as well as being, as I said, in theaters. And it was a real, stake in the ground for us. And I think to some extent also a learning process, of which maybe the main output, or the most important thing, was we were like, oh fuck, maybe it's not as hard as everyone makes it out to be. Like, if you have a good story and you get a camera and you're willing to take the risks and you go there, you'll come back. And I think that for us, that kickstarted our sort of shift into video. I think it to some extent made a name for ourselves in terms of telling good stories and being thought of as a sort of go-to resource for the way that we present stories from a sort of young person's point of view. So, coming back to the first thing you said, like, how do we get from the start to news? I mean, that in some ways was a step in that direction. And so then we then started spending a lot more time in video, and some of it was, through design and strategy that I think Shane in particular identified this was going to be the next big thing in online, and we want to, get in early and build up some knowledge and figure out the model, and there's a lot of, smart and aggressive commercially people. So let's get a business model. We've never been in the habit of being like, well, we'll just get an audience and we'll figure out how to make money at some stage down the road. That's a lot of the startup mentality now. Our thing was always like, it has to be profitable on day one, and we have to figure out what's the advertising model? How do we get users? How do we? So, when you start to marry up, a really good craft that we were developing, and how do you, make video, and how do you make online, and how do you make stuff relevant for young people, and you married it up with a lot of, people working on, and how do we make money out of this? That was, those two things working in parallel got us to where we were. And then, at some stage, then our website started doing a lot better, and VBS was doing well, and we merged them into Vice.com, and then from there we started rolling out. We were like, what does the next generation MTV look like? And MTV, when I say MTV, I mean, like, in the 80s and 90s, it was the bellwether of everything to do with the world of young people.
Yeah.
And, arguably it sort of shed that reputation over the last 10 years, but nobody's really moved in to sort of replace it as the voice of that generation, or the voice of generation Gen Y, right? And so we sort of had that in the back of our heads, like, how do we become that? I think we have a good starting point. So we were like, okay, well, it's clearly it's online, right? TV has a role to play, but young people are first and foremost digesting all their information and content in a digital space. So we were like, all right, well, let's launch channels that people are really into. So instead of just being a lifestyle show, people are really into music, they're into fashion, they're into sports, they're into news, they're into technology, and wherever we can find like areas that we think, young people are into, and we feel passionate that we can make good content in that space, then let's launch a channel. And so that kind of brings us up to today, right? We were launching all these channels, and for the most part, they've all been pretty successful. And then news became, a big focus of ours over the last 12 months in particular, and now is, for us, a huge amount of resource and time and energy and passion. I think a lot of what's driven Vice, and why I think we're good at making stuff and some people aren't, is for the most part the people making this stuff really, really give a shit, and there's a sort of saying in Vice that Shane used to say, he's like, if you make grapple grommets, you gotta really fucking care about what you're making, no matter what it is. Really, stick to your craft, do it well, care about it, be passionate about it. So, we kind of stick to that mantra that we, for the most part, the people who are in charge of making our music content, fucking, they live and die by it. They love it. They're out every day. The people who are making news, it's the same thing. It's sticking to that. So that's kind of, a history of Vice in 6 or 7 minutes, or however long.
That was good. That was really good. I was going to cut in, but it was a nice long diatribe. You said you were focused on revenue from the beginning, and that's like the last thing that you would think when you think of Vice. But do you think that kind of kept you ahead of the rest of the pack that was just creating content for content's sake back in the day? And do you think it also came from your print background, where you had to sell profitable magazines every month?
Well, I think that's to some extent it's true. I mean, I think print was. It's funny because print is such a small part of what we do now. But, for some of us, and certainly those who did the magazine for a long time, yeah, I mean, it provided the benchmark on so many things. So on the content side, it was like when you launch an independent magazine and you go up against the EMAPs or the Condé Nast or IPC or, with the big publishers, you're at a major disadvantage from day one because you have no distribution, and they, for the most part, own distribution, and they can outrank you. And, if you go into W.H. Smith, most people don't really realize that where that magazine sits on the rack is a commercial transaction. Someone is paid to be the first magazine you see, and the people who pay the least money sit at the back of the rack, and you're at a disadvantage, and you don't have economies of scale and all those kinds of things. So when we were doing the mag, we're like, okay, well, the best thing we can do to sort of get our thing out there is let's differentiate. Like, let's do stories that people won't do. Let's say things in our magazine that people are unwilling to say. And to some extent, like, let's reflect what people really think rather than what the magazine industry would like to have you believe that people think. So I think we developed a really good way of telling stories and finding narratives, and we developed a, kind of idea in journalism of like, rather than just reporting on the news, let's get stuck in and let's, if there's a story, whether or not that's, heavy metal in Baghdad and it's music related, or it's news, or even if it's just, funny stuff, like let's get stuck in the middle of it and give our account of what's going on. So we kind of differentiated in that sense on an editorial level, and that kind of permeates through, a lot of the stuff that we do today. And I think those learnings in independent magazine publishing of the best way to win is by having a better story and being more interesting and being more exciting and differentiate and all that kind of stuff. That served us well. And on the commercial side, yeah, you're like, when you're a free mag, when we launched Vice in the UK, you're a free magazine, which at the time, everyone we talked to was like, free magazines are bullshit. Nobody wants to, read them. They're not worth anything.
People don't want to read them when they're free.
Yeah, they're like, there's like, because it's free, there's no value in it.
Right. Okay.
And, fast forward 5 or 6 years later, and then you had, Shortlist, and you had London Light and the London Paper, and now the Evening Standard's free, and then now Time Out's free. And so that model is now kind of, not at all a weird thing. But at the time, free magazines were like, things that Australians picked up at the train station. So we, it took a while to convince people that like, actually, our readers aren't buying tons of magazines, but, if we hit them in lifestyle locations and you give them the right content and it's free and it's differentiated and the storytelling's better, that's a much more effective way of getting into someone's life rather than just, the self-selecting distribution of the people who are going out and spending money. And so that model for us was something that we were really challenged on in the early days. So convincing advertisers that was the right thing to do wasn't that easy, but fortunately the strength of the content was really good, and we managed to convince some people that the distribution model worked, and over time it got easier.
Did you use those same advertisers in print initially on your video stuff? Because you said you were looking, to have revenue models right from the start. Could you go to those kind of print magazine guys and say, "Look, we're doing this over here"?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, we had relationships, of course, and but when we were a bit smaller, we were selling a lot of ads to like, music labels and fashion companies. That was a big staple of the early days of Vice. But then you start to grow up, and then all of a sudden, the bigger fashion companies are interested all of a sudden. So you'd get, Nike, or you get the Adidases of this world, or Levi's, and then, just kind of, and to some extent, the bigger you get, the more interest you get inbound from some slightly bigger players who have bigger budgets. And I think there's sometimes a bit of a fallacy that the bigger players are more risk averse, and sometimes they really are, but at the same time they're the ones that can afford to spend a bit of money not really knowing if it's going to work or not. So sometimes they come with goods and bads, and one of the goods sometimes is an ability to take more risks. Whereas sometimes you do get brands that are willing to take those risks because they have to. I was listening to the guy, the marketing director at American Apparel on your show the other day.
Oh, yeah, Ryan Holiday.
And he was talking about, they didn't have the budgets of the H&Ms of this world, so their marketing was necessarily more daring. And those people are nice to work with because they're willing to sort of get in. And the American Apparel and Vice relationship has been a strong one for a long time. Okay. But now, we find that now that we're a much bigger company and a bigger audience and a more robust commercial setup, that we have relationships with bigger companies that we didn't used to.
Yeah, I think Sarush, one of your founders, was quoted as saying, you guys aren't purporting to be objective because no news is objective. So you guys are subjective and substantial, is kind of what he said. So you kind of put yourself in the experience and then go all out, right? Yeah.
So that's it. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff you see on Vice is exactly that. I mean, we're not pretending to be the BBC. We don't have the resources to be able to go out and to get every single facet of every story, nor should we, and nor is that necessarily what we want to do. We want to tell our story, so that it comes in this idea of like, this is our view on the world. It's not, we're not pretending that it is every single fact that's ever been delivered on a single subject. But what we give is our view, and our view is oftentimes the view of a young person, because for the most part, it's 20-year-old people making these stories, and so we think that resonates well. We think that exactly what Sri says, like. If you look at the objective news in the UK, like, to me, when you look at the spread from the Guardian to the Times, or in fact the Guardian to the Daily Mail, you're like, look, this isn't total objective news. We can all tell that there's a slant on these things. So we're like, look, we don't have a slant at all, but our slant might vary from journalist to journalist depending on their experience and whatever story they're telling.
You know, it's funny. I was at Google the other day, and the guy was like, "Brian, you should identify your London Real fan and put a name on him, and give him an age, and give him a job, and tell yourself what he likes to do on weekends, and like identify this target person." And he's like, "And then when you make future content decisions, say, you know, would Bob like it? You know, that kind of thing." I thought it was interesting, that concept, and I was wondering if you've targeted your audience. Is it like a 20-year-old, or is it a 25-year-old, or do you guys think about things that way?
Yes and no. I mean, no in the sense that I know that lots of brands, they like to create, you know, this is Chloe and she's a fashion retail assistant. She's 21 years old. She earns $18,000 a year. And they create these fictitious characters that are audience profiles. And I think it's used enough by people who know more about marketing than me that it must be a useful way of sort of segmenting and bringing to life the idea of who these people are. But no, I mean, we're not like, we don't go, what do we think, you know, Chloe's going to like to see today? And let's go make content for that. You know, a lot of our stuff is, what do we want to make? What do we feel passionate about? We have, you know, as I said, lots of young people, they go out, they find stories, and we've always been pretty democratic that, you know, it's been a long-held mantra that you can be like, you know, the youngest kid in the office, or you can be the oldest guy in the office. If your story's good and you're passionate about the subject matter and you've got, you know, the will to go make it, then we'll help you make it, and we'll help you kind of turn that into something that we think is good. And so we've had a really open mind to the people we work with, how old they are, how much experience they have, and you know, that's how it's always served us well. You know, it's sometimes actually the opposite is what doesn't serve us well. Anytime that we've been, you know, committed to making stuff with people from traditional backgrounds, oftentimes that's the stuff that doesn't work. You know, especially with stuff like hosts. You know, they've been through theater school and then they went to host training, and so you get them and they're just like, this is how everybody does it, so I'm going to do it exactly like that.
Right.
And I think that's the turnoff for younger people, is it all feels so fake and contrived. And I think, you know, a lot of what we do and why we're successful is you know, you sort of get what you see. It's authentic, and when I say authentic, I don't mean it in a cheesy marketing way. I'm like, these are the people you see are the ones who've made the stories, who did the research, who, you know, flew to the country, and you get there's a sort of earnest outcome there, because it is, and so I think that works, and a lot of the formal training that goes into, you know, as I said, presenters in particular can sometimes be a hindrance to making stuff that feels authentic, because they're like trained to act a certain way, which immediately you can often tell that people don't feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah, and especially if it's in the medium of television, maybe people are used to that. But as soon as you go online and you're on someone's computer or someone's phone, I think it really doesn't work, because all of a sudden, you know, it's a different medium. You know. Now.
Yeah, and you see, like, you know, those YouTube stars, I think, are stars because clearly they have no training. They're like,
right,
they're
they
just
do the opposite.
Kids in their bedroom, and it's very relatable to young kids, because you're like, hey, shit, I got a bedroom that looks just like that, and this guy looks like me and talks like me, and it feels real. And I think for a long time of, you know, the celebrity-driven years of the 2000s in particular, there's a sort of antidote that I think that people are really looking for, of just things that are real, you know, things
right.
that feel relatable.
I think you once said, young people are smart, and they've been marketed to for so long they can tell when someone is bullshitting them. And then you said the days of an advertiser first approach are finished. Do you still believe that? Yeah,
I mean, I think the young people being sophisticated in the way that they just decipher communications that's a given.
Probably subconsciously done. They probably just tune out without even knowing they're tuning out. Maybe.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. It's just like, you know, if you watch it for long enough and you spend enough time engrossed in media, and for most kids that's you know, their entire lives, then you become pretty good at picking out what's real, what's not, when you're being marketed to, and when you're not. But that's not something necessary that you should shy away from. I mean, I think if you take that as a given and then you work within the confines of that as the reality of how people consume media, then it necessarily sort of guides your discussion around, all right, well then how do we market to them? And it's the funniest thing, because lots of brands, it's like, let's apply a really complicated, you know, construct to how we do that. And you're like, just be honest. Just tell people what are the facts. And like, look, if there's something that maybe you think is a bit of a negative, like, don't shy away from it, tackle it head on, like, you know, just be straightforward. And it's funny how often people find it difficult to just, come right out with it.
Right. I think one of your Twitter like profiles or something was like, yeah, we're a little less crappy than most big companies or something like that. I don't know. It was like the epitome of Vice by just like trying to call it exactly as it is.
Yeah, I mean, so people young people in particular, our audience. They're smart. They're smart and they're savvy and they're sophisticated and they've been through it. They understand it and so that just means that in some ways it's really liberating, right? You're like, look, okay, so if we can just kind of call it as it is and let's present things as they are. When you talk about sometimes the way that we work with brands, I mean, look, we've never made a secret. Like, we need to work with advertisers and we like working with advertisers and we think that, they're the lifeblood of our business in the sense of commercial revenues. I mean, we give all our media away for free for the most part, but we think we're pretty upfront about that. And I think for the most part, when you're upfront about it and when you're like, here's a show and it's, it was made possible because we're working with brand, A on it. People are really sort of receptive to that because at least you're just everyone gets the transaction. I think that's the thing, right? Everyone gets the economics of it. I want to watch this show and somebody had to pay for it and it's not me because I'm watching it for free online.
Right.
So for the most part, people accept that in the same way that, it's a long held acceptance that, I watch a TV show for 14 minutes and then I watch 3 minutes of ads and I might not like it, but I get that that's necessary in order to have that. And then we move on to the next thing. And online people understand this, and so I think we're better than most at sort of articulating that in a way that we think is fairly transparent and that young people kind of understand and accept and appreciate the honesty, I think.
Is your audience millennials, and what is a millennial these days? Does that constantly change, that kind of age range or who that is? I don't even know what that term means per se.
Well, I mean, yeah, who knows? I guess largely it's defined as 18 to 34-year-olds, although I've been saying that for 5 years, so maybe it's slightly shifting. But I think, and I don't know who made this a rule, but it's anybody born after January 1st, 1980. So I think arguably that's Gen Y, although I then heard Gen Z written about in like an article, I think in Wired about a year ago. So maybe maybe it has a limit. I don't know when that limit is though.
Okay. So, but your target is quote 18 to 34 or 15 to 30 or somewhere around there. It's probably the most.
Yeah, I mean, 18 to 34 is the broad thing. But again, coming back to your thing of, what is Chloe and her 21-year-old sales assistant? What does she look like? I'm like, we don't go out and we go, oh shit, this might appeal to a 35-year-old. So we can't make that. Or, we just make things that we like and we think that people will like and we think there's an audience for. But it's not, it's not like a rigorous data-driven process to figure out what stories we want to do. It's more of a creative and emotional thing.
Right. But the beauty of YouTube is it's like one of the most democratic, immediate feedback mechanisms out there, and you can see who's watching it and where they are, and then you know right away how many views there are. So you do get some really quick feedback, don't you?
Yeah, no, YouTube's great for that. I mean, there's a bullshit counter in the bottom right-hand corner of every video, so it's like. For every brand that can go, we're the hottest thing on earth, and then you look and you're like, well, you have 84 video views, so you can't be doing that much good.
Is that your metric? Is views ultimately the metric of everything?
No, because of course it's not always as straightforward as that, but it's a good basic indicator, right? So, people who have 5 million subscribers, they must be doing something reasonably well because you cannot get 5 million subscribers by putting out dog shit every day.
Which is you guys for Vice News is about 5 million, right? Or Vice, the main channel?
Vice main channel, I think, is about 5 million.
Yeah, it's just under 5.
But that's not to say that content can't be marketed and you can't drive traffic to a video that you put up, and there's a big business built around that. But yeah, the other one is likes and dislikes. I mean, again, it can't be done algorithmically, right? Nobody can, as far as I know, game it so that a computer gives you, 100,000 likes on a video. And I think our ratio, or Vice's ratio of likes to dislikes on our content, I believe that we're number one out of all the YouTube original content programming. So that's, you're like, look, if you have 5 million subscribers and you have half a million views on a channel and your likes to dislikes ratio is the best in the business, you're like, well, shit, then we're pretty sure we're doing something right.
Right. No, I think you guys are. Did Google and YouTube invest some money with you guys in Vice News like 6 months or a year ago when you went to do this? Do they kind of do like joint ventures and stuff, or do they kind of see what's hot and go with it?
Well, we have a good relationship with YouTube, and we've got a partnership on news, and we'll be forming a big part of their marketing campaign in the U.S. I think kicking off sometime fairly soon. So no, I mean YouTube are amazing partners to have, right? They're far and away the biggest video portal in the world by like, I don't know the number. Is it like 90% of all video traffic is YouTube or online video? So yeah, like, if you want to be big, being big on YouTube makes you genuinely big. And so, we continue to, we weren't sure when we went on YouTube, like, how's this going to work? Is it going to cannibalize our own channels? We didn't just want to be an MCN on YouTube. We've got a much bigger business than, becoming a company like that. But in the end, it turned out it was a big help, like, because it just gives you access to a wider pool of people who are consuming video. And so we tend to put up an exclusive on Vice. We'll give it, we'll air something on Vice, then it maybe ends up on YouTube after that. Sometimes it's concurrent. But what YouTube's done is it's added scale. I mean, for sure, it's hard to exactly correlate because other parts of our business have grown, but the big acceleration we've seen over the last few years, especially in our video, coincides by and large to doing lots more stuff with YouTube. So, exactly whether or not it's one or the other that came first, who knows? But
it's big. YouTube's been great to us. I mean, any kind of, original content and serial content, they love serial content. So like they invited us down to their studios and we can use that, and they're always super helpful. And, they continually remind you they're the second largest search engine in the world. And we get so much organic traffic from YouTube. We get like, by a factor of 10, it's our biggest social media platform, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Because people just find us,
via
YouTube. So
yeah, it's a phenomenal platform. But as I said, it's a part of our business. We're not just a YouTube company.
Right. So you'll put content on your own site and your own proprietary delivery system that you can run your own ads on and that kind of thing. But then a lot of times you'll later release it to YouTube.
Well, it can be both, right? So depending on the content and where it came from and what time of year it is and what channel it sits on and all that stuff, we'll come up with a release strategy around each individual thing, and then put it out. But our own channels get a lot of traffic. I mean, it's a big channel, but it's not as big as YouTube. I mean, very little is as big as YouTube. So all these things come with some thinking behind them, and smarter people than me in our marketing department come up with these things and put them out.
Why does Vice News work so well? And was the timing of Ukraine, did that have a lot to do with it? Because you guys got a lot of seriously positive feedback for the way you guys covered that whole incident.
Vice News, I think, does well, for lots of different reasons. But the main one is it fulfills a consumer need, if I can use kind of cheesy marketing terminology. So when we started doing a lot of content on YouTube on our Vice channel, right? And we were making all sorts of different stuff, but one of the things we were making is a lot of sort of current affairs-y news type stuff that we were making because we wanted to, and we thought it was, we were just into the subject matter.
Short stuff or kind of longish form, like 20-minute stuff?
Both, but a lot of long form.
Right.
And interesting, like when we first started making stuff for YouTube, a lot of people were like, so look, here are the rules of YouTube. Make it 2 minutes and don't go too deep into anything, and if you can make it funny, even better.
Don't tell me about that, man. We put 90-minute videos up on YouTube.
So that was it. So we were like, okay, well, we're not sure that we agree with that, so let's just make the content that we want to make. And the beautiful thing about online video is the format is totally open, right? So if you make something and the edit needs to be 8 minutes and 21 seconds, that's how long it is. And if the edit is, 64 minutes, then that's how long it is. And of course, there's nuances in that. But so we started we were releasing like longer form documentaries and some shorter form. And what we were finding is a lot of our current affairs content was getting traction and getting, reasonably big numbers on stuff that, to some extent almost surprised us about how much traction we got.
Again, the beauty of YouTube, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you get immediate feedback, right? And then so we were out, we started set out to then go look at, all right, well, look, we're getting all this traction. There must be something in it. And again, looking at what people are telling us, which is like, Young people don't like news. Young people are disengaged with the world around them. It's a me generation that don't give a shit about anything other than what they can see in front of, or 6 feet in front of their face. And so I don't know. We just challenged that. We were like, that doesn't make sense to me. And it's like, so many things that we've done over the years. People are like, this is the way it is, and then we go, what? I'm not really sure that doesn't make sense to me. I don't believe that that's the way that life is. And so we started doing some research, and what we found is actually it's the opposite. It's like the responses we had back were that people were totally engaged, and they were fascinated by the world around them, and they were emotional around the world around them. They felt a connection through the internet that that in some ways was unprecedented. But what they didn't like was mainstream news. They didn't like how it was delivered, who was delivering it, the agenda that came with it. And to some extent, I think it ties in with Twitter and Facebook as becoming so critical to people's, consumption of media, because getting news from your friends and having that filter of recommendation sort of made it a more legitimate source, because there's more trust to your peers and there's more trust to that filter. And so we were like, well, look, if the demographic in news consumption is old because young people aren't watching that news, but they're not watching that news because they don't care. They're not watching it because that's not my news. That's my dad's news. Like this is a generation above me's point of view on the world, and it's not mine. And so between those two factors, we were like, well, we really feel strongly that if we go at this hard and we do it properly and we do it our way and we make the kind of content we want to make and we tell stories in the world that are not maybe part of the mainstream news cycle, and it's not driven by an agenda, then we think we're onto a winner here. And so that was kind of underpinning the move into news, a mix of us going, well, shit, the stuff we've made so far is doing really well, and we think there's a big appetite that's not catered to by everybody else. And so I think we're only 2 months in or something like that, and it's been just phenomenal.
2 months, that's it.
I think it's 2. Well, don't quote me on that. Maybe it's 3 months, 4 months, but
New.
it's early days.
Right. Okay. And you guys don't have a newsroom or anchors or anything like that per se. I'm guessing that's a creative decision you guys made early on.
Yeah, I mean, we're not a breaking news site, right? So having a newsroom where someone goes, oh, and now we're going to go to Charlie in Nairobi where he's going to talk about this. That to us, I mean, it just didn't make sense for the kind of stuff we were making and also the way that we wanted to deliver it. I mean,
it doesn't sound very Vice-ish right away when you mention that. It already sounds old school.
Exactly. And so, and in terms of hosts, I mean, what we went out and we tried to find was, like I was saying before, people that we liked the stories they made and the way they made it. And, some of them did come from journalism, traditional journalism background, like Ben Anderson, who's a host on a lot of our stuff. He's
in the States.
No, he's based out of London, but he does a lot of our global stuff. And he'd made stuff for the BBC, he'd made stuff for Al Jazeera, he'd made stuff for the big broadcasters. But whenever we watch this stuff, we're like, that guy makes stuff that we really like. That seems like our kind of guy, and so we have a relationship with him, and now he makes stuff for us. And so it was cherry picking the people we thought fit our mindset, and and we're young enough that we thought we'd get a young person's point of view. So we just went out and we found those people, and a lot of them were like staff writers who had been working for us on Vice for a while, but who had a real interest in news. So there's a guy called Henry in the London office, and he was he was our news guy for Vice.com. And then as we started launching news, he was just chomping at the bit to get out and start making stuff that was a lot more current affairs focused. So some of it was just bringing people up, and we've done that forever. That's. As I said earlier, we always felt that no matter how old you were, where you came from, if you had good ideas and you're good at execution, then we'd put you in place. So some of them we brought up, some of them we went out and found, but we always applied that. They needed to be the right profile and have the right point of view, and not be so sort of jaded with mainstream news that you couldn't pull them back to making stuff that we wanted to make.
Is it tough to get your guys to make a transition from print to video, or do you see some people that can do it or some that can't? Although a lot of your videos, it's not like people are, like you said, here in the report. I mean, a lot of times it feels like journalism, as in they're either doing voiceovers or they're just constructing a story behind the camera.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them do both. Like Alex Miller, who's the editor-in-chief in London, is on camera a lot, and he's also, he's not just the editor-in-chief in name. Like, he sits at a desk when he's not shooting and writes and edits, and and Rocco, who's the editor-in-chief in the U.S., same thing, and Tom Littlewood, who's the editor in Germany, same thing. So, you know, a lot of that, there's a lot of trust, obviously, with those guys, with the Vice tone of voice and our mentality around content and creative. So in some ways, they're like the natural people to be able to sort of put in that place because, you know, A, they get the tone of voice, and B, they're not, they definitely didn't have any formal, you know, video training in that sense. So I think a lot of the times that you see those types, and even, you know, Thomas Morton, and to some extent even Shane, who presents a lot of our stuff, I mean, you know, you get their personalities on screen because, you know, they're real people who haven't, you know, they're not acting, and they're not sitting there in the green zone kind of, you know, with a microphone just giving you the facts.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to put your finger on what that quality is, but like when Shane's in Liberia, he's not doing that thing. You know, he's not doing that reporting from Liberia thing, you know, which I guess you get probably either by watching media all your life or growing up, you know, at the BBC or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's real, and I guess Shane's certainly the best known of the, let's say, the on-screen personalities that we have, and Shane is Shane. Like when you see him in real life, what you see on the videos is what he acts like 24 hours a day, so I think that just comes across, and you know, it's not unique, right? There are other people in this country. You know, you imagine Louis Theroux is Louis Theroux 24 hours a day, but sometimes you watch things and you're like, I don't really know. I get a, you know, two-dimensional mouthpiece, but it's hard to sort of dig beneath that. And if, you know, sometimes I think it turns people off. It turns young people off. I think we're really looking for. They've seen that, and it doesn't seem to make that much sense. And the world is so transparent through social media and through online video and all that stuff that you know, they kind of see it as you know, smoke and mirrors to some extent.
Talk to me about Ukraine. I know you also had a Vice reporter, I think it was Simon Ostrovsky, that was held captive for a while. What happened in Ukraine for you guys, and what was that all about?
I mean, I think to some extent it was, as it was played out in the media, it was as it happened. I mean, you know, he disappeared one day, and we found out about it, you know, really quickly. And
were you guys always going to be, when the stuff started happening in Kiev, were you like, we need to be there right away? Was that always just an obvious thing for Vice News, or it was kind of at the same time you guys were launching, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I mean, to call it fortuitous would be inappropriate, but when we were launching news, there was a number of big things happening. And so I think, you know, we were there, and Simon is a great journalist and speaks fluent Russian. And so we did some great reporting, and to some extent, yes, I mean, it was a coincidence that helped us build an audience, and you know, but we felt passionate about that subject, and that's why we were doing it. And so Simon disappearing obviously was extremely concerning, and you know, fortunately, I think despite what some people might assume is the back end of Vice, you know, we're pretty organized and have policies and practices about what happens when the shit hits the fan like this. And in some ways it was amazing seeing it all kick into action. And to kick into action, like, you know, 4 weeks into being live was a pretty real way of testing out all the preparation.
Like what if they don't like correspond to us within so much time, then we send someone to look for them? Is it that kind
it's
of
all that? Yeah, it's all the same protocols you'd expect out of, you know, the BBC kind of thing. I mean, we didn't just go in all guns blazing and be like, shit, let's just get them on a plane and we'll worry about the details later. It's all pretty considered. So look, it sounded like a harrowing kind of ordeal, and to some extent, I know as much as everybody else insofar as, you know, Simon did a report after and took everybody through what happened to him. So yeah, I mean, it was, you know, it was uncomfortable is maybe an understatement for a few days there, but I guess you know, we always felt like we were in as good a position as we could be in to remedy this situation, given that lots of those things are out of our control. But whatever we could control, it felt like we were on top of.
Are there war zones that you're like, I don't want to go there? Does that ever worry people on the news floor, where now you got this stuff happening in Iraq now, and it's just like, how close do you get? You know, Syria's been kicking off for the last year and a half, 2 years, and that's a dangerous place as well. I don't even know what the protocol is when you sort of send people in and when don't you?
Again, you know, it's, yeah, of course, we have those discussions, and we have a head of news in Europe and a head of news in the UK that are, you know, making those kind of judgment calls of risk, and we have companies we work with that help us deal with that, and and look, we're like I'm sure like almost every news business on earth, first and foremost is the safety of the people, right? So we're really conscious of that, and to some extent, I think aware that as new boys in the game, more than anything, you can't put anything other than safety first, because for real life reasons, but also because I think people would assume that might be the chink in your armor. So no, I mean, look, it's an ongoing process, and we try and put people in the right places and safeguard them as best we can and pull them out if anything goes wrong. And I think, but I don't think that's unique to us. I think that's any company involved in news gathering or current affairs has to go through that. And of course, it would be incredibly irresponsible not to be doing anything like that.
News, is that just the most ultra highly competitive space there is? I mean, does everyone want to be in news? And like in retrospect, are you just like, I'm surprised you guys are either having the success or you're still going to go into news?
Yeah, I mean, I think news is a really broad catch-all term for things, right? Okay. I mean, we're not breaking news, right? We're not BBC 24. It's not like if there's a big fire somewhere in London, we're going to have a reporter there going, "Hey, there's a big fire, and now there's fire trucks," and that's fine, right? And there are people out there like Sky and BBC who have been doing this for a long time, and that's their thing, and they do it very well, and there's value in that. Our thing is more sort of storytelling. It's usually trying, maybe not trying, but certainly we find ourselves often out of that mainstream, political agenda. So if sometimes there becomes these subjects that everybody focuses on because that's the main news piece, but often it means ignoring stuff that's going on in other places. So, for instance, we've been doing a lot of stuff in Brazil right now, where of course every media company on earth is focused on the World Cup and the football, and there's a little bit talking about the shit that's going on. We see the bad stuff behind the scenes, but it's not a great deal. But right. I think for us, you're like, well, that's our angle. Is there's a lot of angry young people, often who are poor, for whom they spent I think it was like $12 billion or something like that building stadiums and putting more police on the streets. And some of the stuff we've done is like maybe 12 billion could have been spent putting in a sewage system in the favelas and trying to get people out of poverty, and maybe building hospitals instead of football stadiums. And these, I think, are very legitimate things to talk about, and I think it's not to say that we want to piss all over the World Cup, but I think a lot of the media just isn't seeing any of that. And some of the footage we had was like at the final of the Confederations Cup like a year ago, that there were these huge riots going on outside the stadium of people sort of protesting the arrival of the World Cup. But that certainly didn't, I had never heard of that until I saw us do it. And so that, it's finding those things that aren't sort of, necessarily intentionally a sort of counterpoint to the mainstream agenda, but just things that we think are interesting and underreported, and where we can get something that that's unique and interesting and differentiated. So, the other thing we did is around the launch, we did a lot of stuff in Venezuela, and, watching that stuff as well, you're like, wow, there's some very troubling social issues in Venezuela, and there's a lot of stuff happening there, but, you didn't really see it on any mainstream news. You didn't watch the BBC 10 o'clock news, and every night here's what's happening in Venezuela again. So there's flashpoints around the world, and I think we spend a lot of time looking at those stories and covering the stuff that other people aren't covering it. And oftentimes, they're driven by young people. I mean, I think there's a lot of angry, disenfranchised young people who feel that their jobs have been stolen and their future's been stolen by the generation above them. So, and to some extent, they're probably right. And so this stuff, a lot of the stuff that happened in Eastern Europe, and in particular in Greece around the collapse of the economy, I mean, most of the young people you're seeing were there for that reason, because they're going to be paying off that debt for the rest of their lives that was racked up by their parents. So I don't know, we spent a lot of that stuff really interests us, and I think the mainstream news is often not that sympathetic, and I think they're seen as troublemakers or as a small vocal minority, but the rest of the country is fine, and maybe sometimes that's true, but like the London riots, when they happened, I don't know, you could argue it was just kids causing trouble, and I'm sure part of that's true. but sometimes I think you need to look at like why are they so willing to cause trouble, and is it part of maybe it's being disenfranchised, and part of it's they have nothing better to do, and part of it's the education's so bad they don't really feel they can do anything better than that. I mean, I'm not qualified to say that, but that stuff really fascinates us, and I think that's the stuff that's underreported.
Yeah, the London rise was really interesting because I always feel like it wasn't properly covered. I don't feel like I really got a good answer. And I know later they ran like some of the criminal profiles on some of the people that had done looting, and these people had jobs, and like it was really weird. These were like middle class people with jobs, and they had done the looting, and it was like completely opposite of what I guess was kind of portrayed to be. So
yeah, it's interesting to think of why people do that. And look, maybe it's just a sort of mob mentality that you see other people doing it, and you then, but it just seems that there's more to it than that. And I agree, I'm not really sure that anyone got to the bottom of it, but I worry a little bit that the answer was, well, we'll just lock them all up. And then you're like, okay, so they were slightly disenfranchised, or at least they lacked some sort of moral fiber to think that what they did was wrong to begin with, and now they got a criminal record. Like, this is not helping the situation to some extent. Not that I'm saying they should get away with it, but it seemed like a very heavy-handed response, and I'm not sure it was like a very American response to things. It was like, we'll just put them in jail.
yeah, also,
Then when they come out, they'll be fine. And
yeah, it also makes me think it could happen again fairly quickly, if things weren't addressed,
Yeah, it was weird. I don't know. I still haven't wrapped my head around that whole thing. I mean, and then I guess what else is weird is, it seemed to disappear. I mean, maybe it's still just bubbling underneath the surface. I can't really tell.
Weird. And I thought the reporting was really bad. And I remember like my buddies in the States asking me, and the way the world media made it look like is that London was a war zone. And like I was walking around, even Hackney and stuff, and I was like, okay, it's not a war zone here, but every single camera you saw was like someone, throwing a fire bomb here and there. And it was just, yeah, again.
It was a weird vibe. I was walking home from work that night, and I left a bit early because, I live in East London, and so I was like, I'll just go home a bit early. And I remember walking home and just thinking, there was such a weird feeling. All the shops were shut, which is weird for 6:30. Yeah. And there was nobody on the street, but like that profile of like 14 to 40-year-old men. I mean, this is Bethnal Green, so that's, maybe not that unusual sometimes, but there was a weird edginess that I've never felt before in a big city, where you could just feel something was happening. And then like an hour later, it all kicked off.
Yeah, I was right by Old Street, and I was walking along, and a few businesses had shut, and like some of the like corner shops and the convenience store guys were out in front of their shop, like ready to protect it, and it was just like this really eerie feeling. Yeah, you could feel it right away. Yeah, it was just like everybody was on edge, and it was like Jesus. Yeah. Anyways,
anyway,
I remember that. Shane Smith is 44. I think Sarouche has got to be in his 40s. You're probably in your 30s. How do you stay on top of this younger demographic as you guys get older? I know you can say, look, let's just keep it real and stuff, but I mean, does part of you always think we need to have that young editor or someone telling us what time it is?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the average age, particularly of the content creators in Vice, is under 30 for sure. Okay. I mean, I don't know what it is exactly, but yeah, I mean, we have always hired young people. Some of that's because they're the ones most attracted to us, and some of it's a conscious decision of, appointing a 45-year-old editor makes no sense. I mean, our sort of mantra is about making content, for young people by young people. So therefore, if you're going to follow through on that, you got to hire young people. And we also like hiring young people because they come, as I said before, they come at it with a really open point of view of what something should look and sound like. So, getting kids right out of film school when they're full of beans, right? They're like chomping at the bit to just make stuff. And I think often if you came out and you go in as a graduate at the BBC, there's a sort of track you get on, right? And obviously there's some flexibility, but I'm going to do a graduate thing for a year, and then I might become a junior associate producer, and then maybe I'll be a producer, and then maybe by the time I'm 30, I'm going to make something, which is fine, But sometimes you're like, I'm 22 and I've got more energy and I've got ideas coming out of my ass and I just want to make stuff. And you're like, those are the exciting people to work with. And I think a lot of time, hopefully we get that through on our content, because that's the mentality of the people making it. So we've had that, yes, we're some of the elder statesmen of Vice are elder in the Vice sense, right? I mean, mid-40s, I suppose, in the grand scheme of things, is not that old. But yeah, I mean, as I said, it's young people making this content. It's young people cutting. It's young people shooting. And I don't know if we could do it any other way. It wouldn't make sense.
How important is it to have young people editing that content and producing it, let alone the shooting and the story ideas and stuff? But
it's as important as the people on camera. I mean, it's funny now that we spend a lot more time doing it. You always think when you're younger, like whoever's on camera, it's their story. And then, once you've done it a long time, you're like, the editor is in some ways just as important as anybody else who works on it, and the producer. That team of people really matters. And so, yeah, you got to have an editor. And sometimes it would be very hard to edit the stuff we're making without a young editor, because the cultural references and the delivery of everything is not something that's easily decipherable from someone who isn't living in that culture. So, yeah, I mean, it matters.
It does, yeah.
So it's across the board.
how do you decide what to go into? You guys came out with Munchies like a month or two ago, and I was like, wow, Vice is getting into food. That's crazy. And then I was like, wow, that's just a great idea. Now it seems like such a great idea. Or Fightland. I mean, how do you choose what to go into, what not to go into, whether that's diluting your brand or promoting things?
It's like a mix of gut reaction and instinct, as well as doing research a little bit. So for news, I think, and because it was such a big move for us, it was driven by an instinct that shit, we're making stuff and people like it and it's newsy, so maybe we should do this more. Like this feels like the right decision, and also a conscious decision of looking at media and going, I don't know, this is a weird sort of environment right now for news coverage for young people. And we're like, well, before we go and spend all this time and money doing it, maybe we should put some feelers out and do some research and make sure that our instincts are right. So that was for us in some ways the most traditional launch we've ever done. Of before we really got deep into it, let's make sure that we're right.
News was, you took your time on news and made sure you had it right. Yeah.
I mean, food was, I would say, a little bit more instinctive in the sense of if you did like a straw poll of the people in our office, like every night it's, what are we going to go do? And like, what's the new fucking burger van and the new pop-up restaurant and the new this and the new rockstar chefs. And it was funny because you see it happening around you. And then if you take a step back, you're like, if this is a real thing in culture and everybody I can see and I know around me is really into it, how come there's no media that caters to it? And so for me, I really like man versus food. And you're like, but there's only one of those. Right. And maybe you could say there's a handful of others that are in that space, but for the most part, it's MasterChef and it's Gordon Ramsay and it's there's a handful of celebrities and there's a handful of formats, and that's kind of it. And so we're like, well, why don't if people are really into it and it's a real thing in culture, we should be able to make this. And so we started making. We made the Fresh Off the Boat with Eddie Wong, and that was a huge hit. Yeah. And Munchies, which is it's now called Chef's Night Out, was the original title of a show we made, and that was a huge hit. So a lot of it, I mean, again, it's a good format online because you can test and figure it out. In TV, I guess a lot of the time when you commit to something, you better hope it works because it's formatted. It's got to be really rigorously scheduled. Where we're like, okay, well, why don't we make a couple episodes? We'll see how it goes, and we can tweak it as we go, and we we'll find the formula.
How important is it to be here in Shoreditch? Like, kind of on the people don't know Shoreditch. It's kind of it's a really weird thing. It's like kind of it used to be really kind of a poorer area where the artists were. It's now really being influxed with tech, with people from the city. It's being quote unquote gentrified. But like, how important is it for you guys to be here, as opposed to somewhere else, or as opposed to Birmingham?
I don't know. You know what? The reason we were here originally is cheap. It was cheap and. Yeah, it was just circumstance. Like, we just ended up here, I think, because we had this investor really early on who had like a little magazine shop, and we rented 3 desks off him. But then, I don't know, it just kind of evolved around us, and we stayed here. So I think I don't know, I wouldn't say it's been central necessarily to what we're doing, but we would have really struggled to do this in Birmingham. I think Shoreditch is in some ways the natural place, but we were just, immediately... It made sense for us, but I suppose it's conceivable that we could leave and life would go on and we wouldn't necessarily change. But Shoreditch has kind of peaked and now it's gone back to being normal to some extent. I feel like maybe like 5 years ago, Shoreditch became like the Nathan Barley version of itself. Like it kind of lived up to all its stereotypes and it became achingly cool. And I'm sure, often people would assume that Vice is entwined in all that, and maybe we were, maybe we weren't. But it's kind of gone back to normal now. I feel like it's reestablished itself as a sort of just a nice place to work, filled with well-meaning people doing good jobs, kind of thing.
Do you have to go further east or north to kind of get to the next shortage, you think? Or
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like Dalston took that over, and maybe
Dalston,
Clapton and places like that. But no, it's nicer in here. And, I think there's lots of businesses that are similar to ours, and exactly why we all clustered here is, and the government would love to take responsibility for it. I'm not sure they have anything to do with it really, but it is now a thing. I mean, there just is stuff happening here, which is beneficial to us, and it makes it attractive as well as a place to work for, when you want to recruit. It's a bit nicer than working in Victoria or Canary Wharf or somewhere like that, which is not that inspiring and not that easy to get to and all that stuff.
No, not a lot of fun. I've been in those places. Let's talk investment. I mean, you guys sold a chunk of your company to, I think it was 21st Century Fox, like 5% like a year ago. You guys had some big valuations of like billions being talked about lately, and you're in the news for even double that with potential partners and investors. How does that affect you? How do you stay who you are with those potential investments? Or should you be completely open to having big investors like that?
Look, I mean, we're focused on making content and doing that. So, as and when we have conversations with other media companies, really the outcome we're looking at is how is this going to make us a better company? How can we make better content and we make more content, and how do we sort of put that out into the market? So, all of the partners that we have and obviously we have great relationships with them, or maybe that's not obvious, but we do. But that's the reason, right? I mean, we're just passionate about doing that thing, and we're always looking for ways to help. And sometimes it's partnerships, sometimes it's investments, sometimes it's finding the right people. I think Tom Freston, as an example, joined the board a while back, and I know that he's been a real mentor to Shane and a big help. So but for us, that that's the focus isn't a lot of like startups or let's say like tech companies. It's just a focus on moving the needle on valuation, things like that. I mean, that's our focus is content. Our focus is entertainment, making Vice become the best source of entertainment and news for young people in the world, and becoming a sort of a real cultural entity that people will love and care about and think back on in 50 years and go, fuck, that changed my life. I watched stuff, and that was my source of information, and it shaped my view on the world. And I think oftentimes we've kind of said that if we focus on that and we put the audience first and we think about making the best stuff we can, then the brands will come in behind us, and if the brands come, then money will come behind them, and we'll be in good shape. So we've always held that as a mantra, that if you make stuff for advertisers or you make stuff for investors, it's not going to feel as good as if you're like, who's the audience for this content, and how can we make something they're going to love? And if we make that, everything else falls into place behind it.
It's interesting what you say about the tech scene, because that is what it's all about. It's like, where did you raise money, Lex, and where are we going to raise money times 10x and 20x? And
well, and that's when I come back to, we were talking about revenue before. I mean, we've always tried to be a real business,
right.
So we're not just out there to, posture up and figure out a commercial strategy later. In some ways, we did it the hard way, right? We built a business that was self-sustaining and had revenue, and sometimes revenue is better than other times, but for the most part, we've been a pretty successful commercial operation. But really, that is a bolt-on to the content, the content that we make. And again, like I said, if that comes back all the way back to magazines of, if we make the best magazine we can and we differentiate it and we're smart about distribution, then we'll be able to convince brands that this is the right thing to do. What we're doing now in some ways is not that difficult as it was way back when. Like, make good content, then we'll find the brands, then we'll get distribution right, and then we're good. It's, those core truths have never really deviated in our business plan.
What do you think you'll be bigger than Sky News or BBC News someday?
I don't know, man. It's the goal isn't, we don't have like an individual company in our sights that we're like, I want to necessarily be bigger than them. I think Shane sometimes says these things around, I want to be 10 times a CNN, but I think it's the point of it is around digital scale and influence, right? We think that the internet offers us to be able to reach a lot of people with our content, and YouTube is a vehicle for that, and Facebook's a vehicle, and we have the ability to get a lot of scale because the way that media is distributed has changed. And we think we can tell really good stories that will have a long-lasting cultural impact on the world around us. And we think, in our noblest of days that, we're telling stories that add real value to the global discussion around various issues. We're telling stories that if we weren't telling them, maybe they wouldn't get told. And whether or not you can argue about the nobility of that, but that drives us on a day-to-day basis. So it's not, can we be bigger than this person or that person, or can we get our value to this or blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's I think Shane has said in his, words of if you take money out of the equation, what does it all mean? And I think for him, that really drives him. It's like, I know he's a passionate environmentalist and he's got 2 little kids, and I think it drives him to sort of make the world vaguely a better place in different forms. But anyway, look, at the same time, we're a commercial organization. We're not just driven because we're nice guys and we, want to change the world. But I think all these things, sometimes it's like people would like to paint you as you're one or you're the other or you're something like that. And it's very easy to sort of couch people in specific terms of reference versus other companies or causes or business models. And I don't know, I guess we're a lot of those things.
What do you think of places like the Young Turks? They're kind of bringing a new spin on news, or even Russia Today. They kind of got like Abby Martin, and she moves with the camera. And I mean, they're kind of fresh approaches to news, but really different than your approach.
I think a lot of the news stuff that's coming out, we're not the only ones trying to do it. I think some are better than others. But the ones that I think work best are the ones that seem to be sort of earnest and sort of valuable. So I think our attitude towards those, I don't want to call them competitors, but for the sake of this discussion, we'll call them competitors, is to try not to be competitive, that I think we can all help each other out. I think we're all trying to accomplish in some ways a very similar goal of transforming that news landscape into something that works today, instead of, so in some ways working against, not specifically, we're not trying to take down any news stations, but trying to establish this as a legitimate place for people to consume news and to put our opinions across. And I think there's a lot of good people doing interesting things. We're not the only ones.
Yeah, it's nice not to fight with other media organizations. Like, I don't know, we've never tried to do that, and I've had BBC people in here doing interviews before our show, and it's nice not to go at it kind of like the old way where you see everybody fighting, for kind of this tiny little part of the space,
Yeah.
Why you guys bought ID Magazine like last year or before? You guys still have print, even though it's like 5% of your revenues. Why still be in print?
Well, we bought ID in December 2012. Not necessarily because we wanted a print. We didn't want to buy a print magazine. We didn't buy it just because it was a magazine. We wanted to do something in fashion, and we felt as a media company that wanted to cater to the interests of young people, it was imperative that we had a presence in fashion. And, ID was such an iconic fashion media brand that had real heritage that people really loved, that people, contributors and audience just felt really passionate about. And Terry was like, Terry Jones, the founder, like a really legitimate visionary in the fashion space and the media space. But Terry was, a little bit older, and we had some staff who had worked there, and we just had the sense that it might be a discussion worth having. And as it turns out, it was. And so we took it over, but the idea was always going to be that we would keep the magazine because we like the magazine and it's an integral part of the ID brand and we're absolutely not touching it. But that we could do something in digital that they hadn't been able to do before. And we had the know-how, we had the capabilities, we had the scale, we had the resources to, launch something really exciting in the fashion space. And that's basically the strategy for ID. It's in some ways it's kind of black and white. I think what everyone expected us to do is what we're doing. But so far it's gone really well. And one thing that Vice has is we have a big geographical footprint, and that allows us to grow rapidly. So, we launched the site in the UK and the US at the end of last year, and by June, whatever day it is today, we're in Poland, Spain, Italy, Netherlands, Australia. We got a bunch of launches coming up towards the end of the year. So our ability to scale...
You're print in those countries?
No, this is digital. So the magazine we're only doing out of the UK. We'll do a global edition out of the UK. So I'm talking about digital growth. That's
for ID or for
ID.
For ID. So there'll be an ID Poland site or an ID.
So you can go onto ID today and click on, if you're in the UK, you'll get sent to the UK site, but you can select to go to the Polish site and you get ID in Polish with Polish content and all that.
That's pretty intense. Do you do that with Vice across the board into other languages, or is
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
wow.
So Vice is in, I think it's like 12 languages or 15 languages, something like that. So yeah, you get Vice, and it's all, let's get a bit more, but geo-targeted, and the advertising is geo-targeted, and it's language-based. So, there's a Russian site in Russian language, there's a Brazilian site in Portuguese, there's a Chinese site in Chinese site in Chinese, China site in Chinese. So yeah, scale, our geographical footprint is a big strength, and so when we make something, we were able, and that's kind of the idea with ID is let's not just make it a cool English language site. Let's do it everywhere.
Right. You mentioned China. You guys do news in China, right? Or you have a media company now in China.
We have a media company in China.
Okay. That's going to be interesting how that works going forward, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, so I look after EMEA, so I can't give you a great deal of detail about their day-to-day operations. I mean, obviously I know what they get up to generally. But yeah, China to me seems really exciting. I mean, I always seem like China, just generally as a country, it's sort of, and I've never been there, so I can only say so much, but it's often painted as this, polar opposite of what happens in Europe and America. And from friends I know who live there and who visited there, I'm like, I don't know, it sounds pretty similar to everything I know about. So I don't know, I know that our Chinese business has done well and is growing very rapidly, and it's a market I know that we're all obviously very excited about.
You guys seem to have cornered the market on North Korea in like more ways than one. Like Shane was originally there doing a documentary a long time ago, and then you guys went back with Dennis Rodman. I don't think, does anyone else have access to North Korea, or have you guys pretty much cornered the market on all?
Yeah, we've done a few shoots there, and they've all done well. I mean, it's a weird place. But yeah, I mean, obviously we're not the only ones who've been there, but certainly the coverage that we did and that Shane and Ryan have done over the last few years, it's been interesting. It's shone a light on North Korea that I think very few people have ever seen, and it's been very successful for us, that coverage we did.
It seems like maybe like Berlin was before the fall of the wall. It seems like North Korea is like one of those last few places that won't exist in 30 years where, there's media blackouts and there's this, totalitarian regime. And like, I don't even know if that will exist anywhere in the world in 50 or 100 years, if information really is accessible everywhere. So
it just seems like crazy town.
Yeah.
It's totally impossible to fathom how things go on.
I think Christopher Hitchens wrote about it, and he was just like, it's almost like, there is some type of theocracy where there is a god, and that is Kim Jong-il, and that it's just this wildest place that he had ever been.
Yeah, it's so fascinating fascinating and depressing to understand how you can just control a population through brutality and misinformation. I mean, it's
for so long too.
And man, it's super depressing sometimes. That the thing that I think is maybe the most depressing thing I've ever heard in my life is that idea that if you're punished, and I can't remember what the list of things you can be punished for, that I think it was Kim Jong-un, one of the Kims. Anyway, that it would take 3 generations to purge you of, the evilness. So they put you in the gulag, and then they put the next 3 generations of your family. So you'd have kids that were born in the gulag who will die in the gulag, and their kids will be in the gulag. It's like the most hopeless, depressing thing I've ever heard in my life.
Wow, I thought the Venetians were bad with like banishing people, but that is bad. Do you ever miss Toronto? What's your relationship like with London? You've been here a long time.
Yeah, I've been here a long time. I grew up in Canada. I have really fond memories of Canada. My parents still live there, and I still go back a few times a year. And my wife and I still talk about moving back there maybe at some stage. But yeah, I mean, it's the most idyllic, or at least I think of it as being this really idyllic place to grow up. I mean, I grew up in Toronto in the fairly far downtown, so it was this lovely mix of being in a big urban center. But like I said earlier, like I played ball hockey 5 days a week on the street, and safety just was never really an issue growing up, and it's just a really easy city to live in, or at least it was when I lived there. So no, I still think back on it really fondly. But Canada's in some ways, it's the greatest strength and the greatest weakness is it can feel a bit isolated. Like it's a sort of it's a secondary market when it comes to things like media and entertainment. A lot of time, and it has a really robust environment, but it's not the leading edge like London or New York. So when I moved here, and you wanted to do something really, really cutting edge, it felt like you had to get out. And Vice, being in Montreal and having launched in Montreal, I think, it was the same thing. It was like being big in Canada is one thing, but if you want to be big, you have to be big in America, or you have to be big in England or Europe. So I don't know, but I mean, it's literally, I mean, I'm a loyal patriot to Canada, and even though I live here for a long time, I still feel absolutely it's my home. And even if for whatever reason I never live there again, I'd still think of it as home.
As home.
Yeah.
What's up for you in the next couple of years as far as like your day-to-day in Vice? I mean, what are your goals, or what are the things you're working on?
We're working on all sorts right now. It's really fun and exciting and exhausting, but
is it full on every day? Is it like constantly out of control? Are you constantly running around to this meeting, that meeting? It just seems like it's a super high growth place to be, and it would be crazy.
Yeah, but it's fun. I mean, I think, I've been in Vice for a really long time, and I think if it wasn't like that, you'd start to go, well, shit, I've been here a long time. Maybe it's time to do something else. But our business just constantly evolves and changes and grows and mutates into great things. And so, I've just never gotten bored of it. I've never woken up one day and been like, I don't know, enough is enough. And maybe that day will come one day, but about every 3 years, I feel like my job is fundamentally different than it was 3 years ago. And so it kind of feels like, why would I leave? And it's funny, I do think sometimes if I ever, think about it, then you're like, but what would I look for that I don't have right now?
Yeah.
I work with close friends, we're doing well, like, I love the creative that we do, our brand relationships are good, like everything is good. So it's very difficult to then, figure out what would I do that would be different. And often you're like, oh, I can't really come up with that many reasons, except for maybe geography. I mean, that's talking about Canada. Getting to Canada one day would be, maybe that's a reason, but who knows? Right.
Are there brands that now, these days, does every brand pretty much call you back now? I mean, does every brand at least want to talk to Vice now, as opposed to maybe 5 years ago where only certain brands would talk to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We're having our moment in the sun to some extent, and hopefully that moment will go on for a long time. But yeah, it's just different doing business when people know you and trust you and care about you than when you're having to fight just to get on the phone with somebody. And same with the content creators and other media companies, and now people will call you up that you want to work with, and they want to do things because you're Vice.
Right.
Versus before trying to convince people, haven't heard of us, but we're this cool media company and we have some scale, and we're trying to know. It's like, it's fun. It's fun doing that because we spent so long in the trenches. And look, we're still in the trenches. I mean, we're not huge just yet. But yeah, I mean, it's nice having like recognition to some extent in an industry, because you spend a lot of time not getting it. And I have so much sympathy or empathy, I guess, for people who start media companies or their own businesses or ventures, and to sort of go at it for that long and be knocked back that many times and keep coming back. I mean, it's tricky.
Yeah, it's interesting how you guys started, like Dan Rather would say something bad about you, or the New York Times or something like that, and you must be like, oh wow, we must be getting somewhere if people are saying, oh, these guys don't know news, or in retrospect, that must have been a leading indicator of success.
Yeah, I think we always had a mentality that we just, you could hate us, or you could love us. We just wanted you to have an opinion about us, and that wasn't to say that we were always being necessarily, antagonistic for the sake of it, but the worst thing that someone can kind of say about something that you're doing as a project is nothing,
right?
Because then it's like you haven't even registered. So at least if you kind of register and people hate it, you can be like, well, we did something. But if you don't even get off the ground, it's it's like wah, wah.
It's funny, like we have a tagline up on our Twitter, and it says putting the BBC out of business. That's what London Real is doing, which is a bit of an inside joke, because we all know with the TV license, you can't put the BBC out of business. And like today, we got an email back from a guest we invited on, and his PR agent guy was like, we will not come on your show. We quite like the BBC, and we would not like you to put them out of business. And I was just laughing. I was like, are you serious? Like, you took that seriously? So, I don't know.
Yeah. I that's it. Like, I think up until now too, like, we've been fortunate in some ways because we kind of compete with everybody and nobody. You know, we've never been, you know, we're not taking on Sky News, you know, we're not taking on The Guardian, we're not taking on, you know, ad agencies. We're just, we're in a sort of, in a weird way, in a nice position of, you know, we sort of compete on a small level with lots of people, but we don't really compete directly with anyone because we're such a varied business. And I think, you know, to some extent it helps when you're breaking new ground and things like online video that, you know, we're just a bit farther out ahead of the competition. So we don't, you know, you don't have that day to day. There's not like some Vice copy somewhere that gets under our skin. It just doesn't work like that.
Right. You guys do what you want to do. At the end, I always ask everyone here a few questions. I'm going to hit you with the same ones. If you could make a phone call to the 20-year-old Matt Elek and give that young man a bit of advice, what would you tell him to do or not to do?
That's a good question.
Where were you then?
Nothing. I don't know. You know, I don't really have any regrets in life, so I don't really feel like there's anything I'd call up and say, you know, you really fucked this up and you should steer clear of it.
Were you in England at that point?
Yeah, I moved here when I was 19.
Okay.
So, no, I mean, you know, there's not a lot of things that I don't know. I don't really know if there's anything I really regret. You know, starting Vice, I think I once had a plan to maybe I'd do it for a few years and then get out, but I didn't, so that would have been a mistake.
Right.
And no, I don't know, like, and I even would, you know, one thing that pops in my mind is like, I went to university and I finished it, and part of me looks back and I'm not really sure why, because it was interesting and it was a way to pass time that was fun, but I'm not really sure you know, I don't look back and think that was a critical moment of my life of getting through university. It didn't. So I don't know, that was like one thing. I could maybe be like, you know, you could have gotten out a bit earlier and gotten into real life, but I'm not sure that's wise advice.
Okay, so you're still not,
for anybody else.
Still not convinced your education was crucial in your current career path?
I don't know, who knows, but it was all very theoretical. I just found the whole thing impractical.
Okay, that's an interesting observation. Best advice you've ever received while you've been at Vice? Is there any one piece of knowledge or advice you got over the years that was like big for you?
No, I mean, I guess, you know, I think to some extent it maybe, you know, goes back to your parents of like, you know, be nice. And I think sometimes, you know, you watch like The Apprentice and there's this sort of this conception that you have to be hard and evil in business in order to get ahead. And to me, that never seemed right. And you come across them every once in a while and you're like, why? Like we can disagree about things and we can, you know, we can not work together, but that's not a reason to come charging into anything with preconceptions of disliking people or being mean. So I don't know. I think that's like a good mantra. Be nice to people. That goes a long way. I think if everyone's just sort of a bit nicer, life is a bit more pleasant, and it's a very easy, free thing to give out.
I bet in your space over 12 years, you've come back around the same people like so many different times, working at different companies.
I mean, look, that's a fact. At least in media, you know, you might not see someone for 5 years, but they'll almost certainly pop up somewhere else. And look, you know, and I hold them sometimes. You know, when you cross paths with people you don't like, it's like 5 years go by and you still not hold grudges, but you just go in and go like, oh, fuck that guy.
Yeah, you remember that, right?
Yeah. So I don't know. So that, I don't know if that's a piece of advice or maybe it's, you know, something my parents drilled in. But yeah, be nice. You know, it's easy and it's free.
Last question, to the 20-year-old that's listening out there, what advice do you give to them, you know, if, say, they want to get involved, if they want to one day work for Vice, or, you know, I don't know, get involved in the media business themselves? What would you recommend?
I mean, I think it's around work, you know, it's working hard. I think certainly it's really interesting. You can see when we have people come in and they're really junior kids, and it's like when they get the job or they get, you know, through the door, then they're like, well, I'm in now. And that, you know, sometimes there's this like sense of entitlement that oh, well, I'm here, and so therefore I'm going to succeed. And like, you know, the best people are the ones that just put your head down, work hard, like figure out your craft, make it better. So, you know, it's that, I guess, look, that probably that mantra, be nice and work hard, you know. And I read a really interesting quote the other day. I really liked it anyways. It was in the back page of the Sunday Times magazine. It was some interview with a politician, and she had some quote from her father that was like, it's okay if you're a street cleaner I can't remember the exact quote. Something like, it's okay if you're a street cleaner, but you should always try and be the best street cleaner in the entire world. And that seems something that's good. And for young people, like, you know, whatever you're going to do, if you want to work at Vice, you want to make films, you want to sell ads, you want to be a graphic designer, then just be like, then try and be the best graphic designer, and hopefully that will get you a long way. So yeah, effort.
Do you get
like a major thing?
Do you get tons of videos sent in from around the world for people that want to have their video on Vice or be Vice reporters? I mean, it seems like you must get sent tons of things. And I was just wondering, how good are they? Are most of them not very good, or are you quite surprised, like, with what you guys get sent?
You know, it varies. We get sent lots of stuff. I mean, not a lot of it, to be honest, lands on my desk, but it's weird. A lot of the time you can just tell, you know, and not just on content creators, but I don't know, sometimes you just meet people and you can just immediately know that they've got their shit together, and they have a sort of, you know, a sensibility about what's good and what's bad, and certainly the ones that come in with that attitude of, like, you know, I'm going to be the next big thing, and you want to hire me because I'm the best thing on earth. You're like, almost, you know, 99 times out of 100, that is definitely, it is the reverse is true.
Okay. As in medium, short term, they're going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's just like, it's a bad attitude, right? You know, it's a weird thing, particularly if you're only just starting out, to come in and say, I'm the best thing that's ever happened in filmmaking. Like, look, when you're 60, maybe you can look back on life and say, I made the best films. You know, there's a couple of people out there in the world, but it's a weird mentality to have right off the bat, is to think I'm the best before I've even started.
Right. Well said. And I guess everything you guys do is really collaborative, you know, whether it's
yeah, I think we're like, you know, I think I said it earlier, like, there's lots of like earnest people who really care about what they're doing, working very hard at it. And a lot of the time I think people, you know, wonder about the Vice special sauce and what differentiates us and why did we grow. And you're like, there's a really, really dedicated group of talented people working extremely hard all the time. And some of them have been there a long time and some of them are new. But, you know, the secret of it is that we work very hard at it, and we care deeply about the stuff that we're making and the audience we're trying to reach. And we believe in ourselves, and we believe in what we're doing. And that's like, that in itself, I think, is something that's actually difficult to achieve. You know, I think often people think you can solve it with tech or there's some silver bullet. You're like, no, it's just smart people working very hard and you know, being very dedicated to it.
Well said. Matt, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. People want to get in touch with you. Are you a Twitter guy? Or are you a LinkedIn guy? Or do you want people not to get in touch with you?
You can get in touch with me. I have a Twitter account that I don't use, but I think it beeps on my phone if someone, you know, tweets at me. So
okay. Are you guys hiring?
We're always hiring, yeah.
Okay. Selectively.
Selectively. I mean, yeah, if you know, it's on our website. You look, there's a job section, and you know, we're growing really quickly, so there's always something going on. Okay,
cool. They can find you at vice.com, across all your YouTube channels. It's going to be fun to watch everything that you guys are doing in the next few years. I can't imagine what verticals you guys are going to go into, but it's great stuff. Thanks so much for coming on. As we say on London Real, it's about the journey. All the best with you and yours, and take care.
Thanks so much.
All right.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.
This week on London Real, we have the English rapper, poet, and journalist, Akala.
Hate by the pound surrounds my reflection. I do this for my own protection.
If I didn't go to Pan-African Saturday School, if I didn't grow up in that empire, if I didn't listen to Wu-Tang Forever or read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was 9, would I be the person I am today? Probably not.
One too many man that could have been doctors end up spending the whole life boxed up.
Hip-hop was my life. It was something I lived. I loved interacting with it. I wrote lyrics every day. I was in battles.
Cause to me, all they do is breed conflict.
First time I saw someone get stabbed, I was 12, and it was a little poke. It was a meat cleaver in the back of a guy's head. I had other teachers that felt that a person from my racial, cultural, economic background, and certainly from my socio-economic background, should not have been top of the class. These were guys who were doing well in the street, but they'd spent so much of their life in and out of prison, etc. So they were like, you don't want to be like us. You know, you're clever. In fact, if you drop out of school, we're going to give you a hiding.
Yeah, they say you are British, and that lovely patriotism they feed you. But in reality, you have more in common with immigrants than with your leaders.
If the music is good enough, if the visual is good enough, if your online interaction is decent, you can keep your integrity and have a career.
If we're honest, true strength is the strength to be honest.
Ultimately, any power structure in the world wants to stay powerful.
On Sunday, London Real presents Akala. Knowledge is power.
It's fear, but at 20, you can't admit it's fear.